All right, folks, welcome to the Otherppl Show. I'm Brad Listi here in Los Angeles. It's good to be with you. I hope you're doing all right wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, and support the show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. It is Friday, so I have for you another flashback episode. These flashback episodes involve me reaching into the Otherppl archives and sharing an excerpt from a past episode of note. Today, I am going to be looking back on episode 401 and my conversation with best-selling author Hanya Yanagihara. Hanya's most recent novel is called To Paradise. It was published last year in 2022, and it was a #1 New York Times bestseller. Her previous novel, A Little Life, was quite celebrated. It won the 2015 Kirkus Prize. It was a finalist for the National Book Award and the 2016 Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction, and it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. Her debut novel is called The People in the Trees, and it was shortlisted for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize in 2014. So, quite a career that Hanya has going for herself. She is also the editor-in-chief, I should mention, of T, the New York Times style magazine. And when we spoke back in 2016, I was living across town in my old house, this kind of rundown Spanish bungalow. And the garage that we were in, this was the garage with very poor lighting and ventilation. There were wasps. It was a garage, and Hanya was a good sport. We had a good talk, and I'm excited to share the conversation with you. The official air date was February 24th, 2016, episode 401. And please be aware that if you like what you hear in this flashback episode, you can listen to my full conversation with Hanya Yanagihara wherever you get your podcasts. All episodes of this show are available in the feed. It's there, wherever you get your shows. Look for episode 401, and you can listen to the full conversation. Okay? So let's get to it. This week's flashback episode from my conversation with Hanya Yanagihara.
With this book, I got lucky. I knew exactly where I was going, and I was very disciplined about writing. I think
so let me stop, though.
Yeah.
What, 700 pages in 18 months? Like, what kind of discipline are we talking?
Well, at the time, I was only working 4 days a week, and for people who work 4 days a week, you know that fifth day makes a huge amount of difference. It's like having 2 extra days. So Monday through Thursday, I wrote from 9 p.m. till midnight. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I wrote 6 hours a day. And if you stick to that regularly, you can get, and you know where you're going, and you really feel like you have momentum, then you can really get it done very, very fast. It's not necessarily, I don't think it'll ever happen again, and it's not necessarily something I'd recommend. It really involves a sort of intensity of not only time, but quality of time that I think is thrilling in a lot of ways, but also harmful in certain ways as well.
I was going to say, socially, you're not going out much. You're
really not. You're really not. And I, didn't see anyone for about a year and a half, a little bit longer. And it was, as I said, it's wonderful. Anyone who has found themselves really in the groove of a creative project where you feel like the path in front of you is so clear and so unblemished, by potential, potholes and so on, knows that it's a wonderful sensation, and you just try to ride it for as long as you possibly can. On the other hand, it is a sort of project, this was a sort of project where you feel that the project is really living you, and you are being pulled along by this thing, not to mix metaphors too much, that really won't let you out of its grip. And that's what it felt like for this. So it was wonderful, and it was draining in ways that I didn't really realize until the book was done and published.
Did friendships atrophy? Did you send out a blast on email? Or do you email?
I do email.
Because we talked before that we came on the air. You don't even have a cell phone.
No, I don't have a cell phone. It's one of my main points of interest, I think. But I don't have a cell phone. I do have email, but I have Yahoo, which basically counts as not having email.
It's a little bit better than AOL.
A
It's like
little bit.
yeah.
It's pretty close to CompuServe. But I basically didn't see anyone for a couple of years. I saw my best friend, who's also my reader. We saw each other every Friday.
Jared.
Yes, and I made a point of that. But most other people, I just didn't see at all.
And so when you go to work 4 days a week, are you able to get your mind off of the project? Like, did having that day job in a project that's coming, out of you this intensely and this quickly, did having the day job provide like a healthy balance?
Yes, very much. I mean, it was a relief to get to work and shut off for those 9 hours. It makes the hours spent at home much more intense, and it gives you a real clarity of time in a way. It makes you much more disciplined about time. It makes the hours that you have much more distilled, I suppose. But on the other hand, it's wonderful to go and gossip with your coworkers and worry about billing and administrative work and not have to think about the life of the book during the daytime.
This is some intense stuff that you're covering in the lives in the book.
Yes, but it's not so much the subject matter. It was that in order to create a book like this, the world of the book has to feel, and the characters in the book have to feel more real to you than the world that you're inhabiting and the characters in your life. And again, it's a giddy sensation when that happens, but you can also feel yourself slipping away from your own life, which is why it's helpful to have something as grounding as a job to go to, where you physically have to get up, get dressed, put on a different face, be presentable, talk to other people, and where you are no longer the creator of a world, but part of it.
Yeah. Well, how do you know with a 700-page book? I mean, with any book, but especially I think with a book as hefty as this one, how do you know when it's done? Did you know? Was it final?
I did. I knew the last lines before I began. I knew how it would break into parts. I had the structure laid out. So it was a very clear path for me in the way that, say, the first one wasn't. And that most of my writing, when it's, whether it's a sort of a short piece or a 4,000-word essay, is not that clear. But this book was very clear. So I knew I was able to really time when I would be done. I kind of knew how long it would be, and I could kind of guess when I would be finished, just kind of based on my pace.
And then you would hand them off to Jared, like sections of the book off to Jared, who's like he's your reader.
He's my reader.
You're writing to him?
Yes, very much.
To please him, basically. Or to impress him?
I don't know if it's to please or impress, although that's part of it. It's, I suppose, a different kind of communication. I think anyone who has a reader, a single reader that they write for, is in a way trying to communicate in a different way outside of the vernacular of everyday chatter, of, well, my life is this, and I'm doing this, and I saw so-and-so, and we talked about this. When you share a novel like this, which is about friendship ultimately, it is a way of, I think, sometimes articulating what you couldn't naturally do in the course of a conversation, because it would seem too artificial or too forced or too awkward. But you hope that, or I did at least, that when he was reading it for its text, but also recognizing, I suppose, some sort of subtextual messages that I wasn't even quite aware of, but I hoped he would be able to articulate when I wasn't.
And was he able to do that?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think, great readers can be great readers in different ways. I mean, some people are very good at picking up on the small details, on word choice, on sort of rhythm and pace, and some people are very good at the conceptual questions, the logic of the book. Does the character not only sound like he's supposed to, but does he think like he's supposed to? And some people, I think, are good at the sort of the construction of a book. Is it pacing itself well? Is it hanging together well? He happens to be good at all of those things. And so I would finish
What's his phone number?
You can't have him. So I would finish a section, I would send it to him, and he would write back with an immediate reply. He reads very fast. And then I would send him about 10 to 12 questions, some of them very granular and some of them big, and he would write back answers and also add in his own points. And sometimes these too are very granular, like Thanksgiving is always on a Thursday, little things, little copy editing notes, or I'm not sure you're using the right word here. And sometimes they would be bigger. I don't think that this is how Willem would sound, or I don't think that I'm not quite buying the sex scene here, so things like that. So that would be the first round. Then I would send him another set of questions, again about 10 to 12, and he would answer those. And then every Friday when we see each other, we would talk about the life of this book. And so in a very real way, this book came out of a long conversation with him. And it does feel, to me, like a record of those months.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, I don't, he read my first book as well. He reads everything I write, so I really don't know. At this point, he's so much a part of the process of writing that I don't know how I would do it if he suddenly stopped doing it.
Yeah, well, it's not uncommon for, as I'm sure you know, it's not uncommon for writers to have that single reader, whether it's a spouse or it's a friend or
right.
whoever it is, like somebody who understands you.
Yes.
Somebody who can save you from yourself.
Yes.
When you are off track or you're off tone or whatever it might be, it's probably a great relief to get his feedback.
It is. And, it's not always, I think, for a lot of writers, someone who's their best friend or their closest companion. In my case, it happens to be. But I'm interested always in writers whose reader is someone with whom they have a little friction sometimes, or someone who is simply their reader. They're not their best friend. They're not, their lover. They're not. Their sole relationship is as reader, and I find those relationships very interesting.
And what's the case? You're also friends with Jared.
Yes.
So it's a friendship, and he's your reader.
Yes.
And you guys are tight, and this is a book about friendship.
Right.
So it's all of a piece.
Yes. Yeah.
Did he change the book fundamentally, or because I imagine with a book that comes out this hot and fast, maybe it was mostly intact, or did the feedback you get editorially from him and then from your editor, at Anchor,
at Doubleday.
At Doubleday,
yeah.
Did the book go through massive changes editorially?
Not through massive changes, but certainly the way that the characters think about friendship, the way that they think about love, the way they think about sex, many of those things. It's not that they shifted dramatically, but they definitely morphed and developed through our conversations. There's a scene, there's sort of a leitmotif in the book of these hyenas that chase the main character Jude from time to time.
A cheery little leitmotif.
Yes, a cheery little one. And when it first occurs in the book, Jared and I have been talking about it, and he said, I think the hyenas are sex. And he was absolutely right, but I hadn't been able to articulate what they were. I knew that they were a manifestation of Jude's fears and anxieties, but until he said the hyenas to him are sex itself, I hadn't been able to articulate that. So a lot of what he was doing in the process of writing this book was really, I think, naming what I had on the page. And by doing that, by being able to explain to me what a metaphor meant, he was able to, it helped me continue that metaphor in some ways throughout the book.
It's like teaching you how to understand your own book.
Yeah, completely. Yes, very much so.
What did the actual nuts and bolts of a writing session look like for you on this book? You have your 9 p.m. to midnight window. You get home on Wednesday night. You've been at work all day.
Yeah.
You sit down. If you don't have a cell phone, do you have internet?
I do, but I was pretty disciplined. When I know I have to get something done, or when I feel the compulsion to get something done, it's not a big distraction for me. And I would just sit down and just start writing. I had just a very basic Word document with sort of dates, fragments of sentences, sort of things I had to remind myself to do. Because this book doesn't have years in it, I couldn't date things by years, so I kept track by, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And sometimes I would say, don't forget to include this. You mentioned this in part 1. You have to make sure to put this back in part 4. Or Willem starts filming this particular movie in November. Make sure that he's going to be done by,
like consistency issues.
Yes, consistency issues. And that was a big part of it. And that way it felt very much like directing a play or a movie, where you really have to make sure that, when the gun appears in the first scene, that it somehow either goes off or gets put away in the third. So there was a lot of just tracking of my own details. And that's really something I kept an eye on. I mean, time is measured in this book by anniversaries, by Thanksgivings, by birthdays, by different measures of time. And so in order to make that sort of elasticity of time work, I had to be fairly structured about how I was keeping track of it.
Yeah, I find that in writing that time shifts. especially if you're jumping a significant period of time, are very difficult to do well without jarring the reader. And when they're handled well and they feel seamless, I'm always impressed by that as a reader, where you're like, oh, they just jumped and I didn't even bat an eye.
Yeah, me too.
You have to be careful with it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I always think that, the reader will really go along with you in many, many ways. But I think as a reader that the more sort of fantastical the book is, the book's premises or its characters or its themes, the more I really want something, I really want terra firma. And that terra firma is the structure, and it's the sense of sort of authorial timekeeping. That if you think that someone is really watching out for the details so you, the reader, don't have to worry about them, then you can kind of relax into the life of the book and forgive it, I think, a lot more.
Yeah, if you're worried about the time,
yeah,
then it's not a good sign.
No,
as a
that's
reader.
That's right.
And what about as a related question to the issue of time, the very conscious decision to remove from the book anything that could mark it, like politically?
Yeah.
There's no mention of 9/11 in the book. There's no, you know what I'm saying? The book kind of
I
exists in a timeless New York.
That's right. And the New York of the book is really evoked by interior landscapes in both senses. So there's not a lot of descriptions of architecture or of scenery or of the exteriors of New York. What you have instead are the insides of apartments and, of course, more figuratively, the insides of these characters. And when you strip any fiction of historical markers, of context in a way, what you're effectively doing is trapping the reader within the emotional lives, the interior lives of your characters. And it has the effect, I think, if you can do it correctly, of making the work feel intimate and also claustrophobic. And there really is nowhere else for the reader to go. They have to remain in this sort of closed circuit of a world that you've created for them. The other thing is, I just think it's sort of a cheat in contemporary naturalistic fiction and this happens quite a bit. You're reading a book and it, then the book will announce to you, and then 9/11 happened, or then 2008 came and the stock and the stocks fell, and you, the reader, is supposed to fill in for the characters what they must be feeling or how the mood must have shifted, and it's too easy in a way. It's depending upon the reader's own emotional reaction to history, which you, the writer, assume is going to be exactly like yours, and is A, often not the case, and B, I think if you have a book about history, about recent history, you must have something to say about it, and that just wasn't the point of this book.
All right, folks, there we go. That's this week's flashback from episode 401, which first aired on February 24th, 2016. I was talking with Hanya Yanagihara, best-selling author of 3 novels. And in the conversation excerpt that you just heard, we were talking about her book, A Little Life. You can listen to the full conversation, episode 401, wherever you get your podcasts. It is in the feed. You can also listen on YouTube. Once again, Hanya Yanagihara's novels include To Paradise, A Little Life, and The People in the Trees, all of which are available wherever books are available. The Otherppl podcast is offered freely. If you had a good experience and you would like to support this show, you can do so at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe to the Otherppl YouTube channel. If you have a couple of minutes and you would be so kind, I would appreciate it if you would rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. It helps new listeners find the show. If you would like to get Otherppl gear, a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, what have you, you can do that at the show's official website, otherppl.com. There are different colors, different sizes, women's sizes, men's sizes. There's even kids stuff. So if you want to get some Otherppl apparel, you can do that at otherppl.com. If you would like to sign up for my free once-a-week email newsletter, you can do that at bradlisti.com or otherppl.com. I would love it if you would subscribe to the newsletter. Again, it's free. Finally, a quick plug for my latest novel. It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. It is out there now in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook, so I will read it to you. It's called be brief and tell them everything. So coming up on Sunday, there will be a new Craftwork episode. I'm going to be talking with author and editor Chelsea Hodson, founder of a new indie press called Rose Books. We are going to be talking about how to start your own indie press. So stay tuned for that, coming up on Sunday.